I'm Melissa Marsh. I lead an organization called Plastark. We do social research and people analytics for the built environment. And this is the third digital panel and the fourth in total panel that I've helped to coordinate and moderate. And the great team that puts together all the thought leaders for the real estate program keeps making it harder and harder for me. So now we have 6 panelists today, which is great news for you as an audience, because I think that we have an incredible set of people and perspectives here. And I don't want to spend too much time talking myself. And we're going to get right into that. So as I said, we do have just an amazing set of folks today, and I'd like to actually have them introduce themselves to you, in part because I think they do have such a unique perspective, and everything's changing so quickly in this COVID moment. And then I've also asked them if they think it's relevant, since this is an academic conversation, sort of a career-oriented conversation, to also mention a little bit how they got into what they do, or how they got to that perspective that they have in this world of retail and hospitality. And I'm going to ask Barry to introduce herself first. Barry, coming off mute.
I've been on so many webinars, and the mute is always the hardest part of them. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. I'm Barry Scardina. I'm the Executive Managing Director and Head of Retail for Cushman & Wakefield across North America. I'm really happy to be with you today. A little bit different than some of the other real estate people that you'll hear from today. I actually am a 30-year retail veteran, and so I grew up on the retail side of the business. And I started my career very young, at the age of like 16, working in stores, and developed just a passion and a love for the industry. Over the years, I worked my way up mostly on the operations side of the business. So for those of you who understand the retail business, I was involved in planning, allocation, business planning, store operations. So I was definitely an operations leader. And I worked for fabulous companies like Gucci, Ralph Lauren, Tory Burch, and that's where I met some of my friends that are on the panel today. And most recently, I was the president of Calvin Klein for North America. I've really enjoyed working in this industry. I think in addition to, getting great skills around leadership and talent development and being focused on diversity and inclusion, I've had a great opportunity to drive business. And we all know the retail business is so important to the overall US GDP. And so I've always felt like I've been doing my part to contribute, to our economy. I'm looking forward today to sharing some insights, both from a real estate perspective and a retail perspective. And if you have any questions, please feel free to message me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you, Barry. Amazing experience for this panel. Liz, another perspective from deep in the heart of retail.
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Melissa. My name is Liz Edmundston. I am the president and CEO of Group Dynamite, which holds the 2 retail brands, Garage and Dynamite, which has about 350 stores across Canada and the US. We're based here in Montreal. But I myself am actually an American, born and raised in Pennsylvania, and I'm a proud Lehigh University graduate. So I'm really thrilled to be here today with all of you, because I got my start right where many of you are sitting. I actually started retail similar to Barry, and actually, in full disclosure, Barry and I have worked together at several companies and are still very much active in the industry. But I guess you could say I started my career at the Lehigh Valley Mall at the Limited when I was also a teenager, but really worked, my major at Lehigh was international careers. That was before international business actually even existed as a field of study, if you can believe that. I'm dating myself, but my passion for the industry, fashion, and really just global business led me into retail. I started my career at Bloomingdale's, actually got my start through a Lehigh alum who made that connection. So these connections that you're making as students is super critical. And I think you should leverage every one of us on the panel. But that led me to companies from Gap to Ralph Lauren, Tory Burch as well. And most recently, before starting this role, I was actually the Chief Brand Officer of Calvin Klein for Asia Pacific, having lived in Asia for the last 6 years. So my career trajectory came full circle, not only working through the fashion industry, really on the buying and merchandising side. Barry was my planner. But really looking at then moving into management roles and taking a much more broader global perspective, which has been really exciting. So I'm thrilled to be here today, and I will share with you all the insights that we're learning here on the front lines from the retail perspective.
Thank you so much, Liz. And you can't have retail without a little bit of food and beverage to whet your appetite while you're doing your shopping. Phil.
Well, thanks. It's nice to be invited to this panel, and introduce myself simply as Phil Colicchio. I am the co-lead of Cushman and Wakefield's specialty food, beverage, and entertainment practice. We do our work internationally, which is an awful lot of fun. And I get to work a great deal with Barry, and I get to work a great deal with Garrick, and I get to work a great deal with Tara, which is also a terrific benefit. How I got to where I am is a simple but kind of an odd journey. I'm a lawyer, and I practiced as a big firm real estate lawyer for many years. As a result of a family member, I'm from a small Italian American family in New Jersey. The result of a family member trying to do something special, I developed an expertise in the restaurant industry from a legal perspective. Before it was all said and done, my cousin Tom Colicchio became one of the world's most decorated chefs. And I wound up representing the interests of over 50 James Beard Award-winning chefs and restaurateurs. As a result of that, and as an attorney, I had to create a consulting division within my business, because attorneys can't represent both sides of equations. And after a while, the real estate developers and the hotels wanted me to help them with their food and beverage. We formed that with my partner, Trip Schneck. We were blessed with some popularity relatively early on. And I was able to bring that group to Cushman and Wakefield in late 2018. Hopefully this is also important. I'm also a faculty member at the Culinary Institute of America, where I teach legal and real estate strategies in the master's program. And while I am not an alum of Lehigh, I am a proud alum of Seton Hall University and Villanova Law School, where half my class was made up of the Lehigh kids who did not get into the University of Pennsylvania Law School.
We've all got a unique connection. Thank you so much, Phil. Next we have Stephanie.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Lee. I am a recent graduate from MIT School of Architecture, and in my final year of grad school, I started a company called Space Us with my classmate and now co-founder. We are primarily active in Boston, and really the company started as a dream. We were residents in Cambridge, and we realized all around us there were vacant storefronts everywhere. And we felt frustrated by that as a lived experience. And so we had the idea of transforming these storefronts into shared creative workspace, event space. We created pop-up opportunities for small businesses. And oftentimes we use cultural activations to drive foot traffic. Obviously these days things have changed, and we've been working and collaborating with main streets, cities, neighborhood associations, small businesses, and using our learnings of how we can utilize that space in a more effective way. And we're helping them adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. I'll say our work has expanded to identifying new opportunities for retail to better, to more efficiently use that space inside, as well as see ways in which we can use shared amenities to expand the footprint of that business outside.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. I think that many of the things that have happened maybe more significantly because of COVID were transformation in towns, or maybe people moving out of certain areas or underuse of certain properties. That's been accelerated by COVID, but you were already looking at ways to solve for some of those challenges that happen naturally as our cities evolve and change. So looking forward to your perspective today. Alrighty, two amazing folks on the anchor legs here. Garrick, could you introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Garrick Brown. So I'm our Chief Retail Analyst at Cushman & Wakefield. And as for the question, how do you become a Chief Retail Analyst? Accident. That tends to be how you end up in research and commercial real estate. My studies at UCI were, University of California, Irvine, were originally in the arts. And I'm very grateful for that because I was working my way through school, alumni of Brookstone, Macy's, Nordstrom. And while I was going for an advanced literature degree, I realized at Rizzoli Books, where I was the operation manager, I was learning more about literature there than at school. And suddenly I pivoted towards econ. And what I ended up finding was that when I fell into this industry, that the critical thinking and communication skills from being involved in the arts turned out to be invaluable in ways as a student, I wouldn't have seen those skills transferable to the business world.
Great, thank you so much for that, Garrick. And then finally with the anchor leg here, amazing career and tons of perspective. Naveen, would love to hear a bit more about you.
Thanks for the invitation. I'm the outlier, clearly. I'm from Texas, so clearly quite a distance from Lehigh and the Pennsylvania region. Based in Houston, I lead the retail business for JLL across leasing and capital markets for the Americas and the global chair for our global retail business. Been in the retail business as a fourth generation retailer, so it's basically all I know, which can be a good or a bad thing. But as it pertains to my experiences in retail, I will say the following. Right out of college with a finance degree, I worked as a salesperson and a clerk at an appliance and video store, and worked my way up to owning a chain of video stores that I sold to Blockbuster back in 1989. And that resulted in eventually getting to development. And from development, I got into the brokerage business. And within 4 years of being a broker, turned into management, and now I'm just costly overhead. That being said, fortunate enough to run a really great business at JLL, which has a global perspective, and I'm happy to share some thoughts with you on the call today.
Excellent, thank you. I'm sure you're so much more than costly overhead, but appreciate that. Tara, we missed you right at the beginning, but Mike did a lovely introduction of you. Before we jump into the heart of this topic, this exciting topic, might you want to add a few words, or should we wait till the end?
Oh, let's keep going and I'll say them at the end. Thanks, Melissa.
Okay, wonderful. Alrighty, well, our first topic is change, and certainly it has been a time of historic change. Really, I think retail, certainly we're all here because retail is one of the places that has felt that change in some of the greatest ways. So let's take a look at those changes that are happening and get some perspective from each of our panelists. First, I'd like to hear from you, Liz, and thinking about what are some of the things that you've seen in this initial disruption, and what are the things that you're seeing pop up given your experience so far?
Thanks for the question, Melissa. And I'll answer really what we're seeing from a consumer perspective. So it has been fascinating. As you've mentioned, none of us have lived through a pandemic before. It's new to us retailers as well as to the consumers. And we have two brands. So we've seen an interesting trend between our two customers. So our younger customer, which is our garage customer, which is a teenage girl to an early 20-something, she honestly has been largely unaffected by this. Truthfully, stuck at home, usually now going to school from home. She's been shopping online. And the minute we reopened our stores, she was back in full force with her friends, looking for the stores to be a social outlet. Mm-hmm. And lucky for us, our product categories are quite casual. And so we've seen actually a very nice response from that customer. On the other side, slightly older and only slightly, our Dynamite customer is an early 20-something to early 30. She's been largely impacted. So perhaps her job has been furloughed. She, is living on her own, so expenses are tight. She was working in an office, but now is no longer. She's working from home. So she's been much more impacted, and our business has been much more impacted there. Her changes in purchasing is definitely going much more casual. She is much more concerned about going into stores and has been using e-commerce as a way to shop. But what we've seen that's really interesting is that the customers who do choose to come into our stores, they are now full price shoppers. They're really there for an experience. They're not there to kind of shop sale racks. So it's really put the brand, the brand experience really as the paramount reason to go into the store. And I think while retailers have been thinking about that for a long time, it has absolutely accelerated that. Truthfully, the e-com channel is where we're seeing any type of sale activity. So a big shift into that. And she, now that she's very comfortable shopping online, because if she wasn't shopping online, she sure did during the pandemic. Yep. She's now looking at the channels really as a connected experience and really a seamless integration. And that's what she's expecting from brands at this stage.
That's fascinating, Liz. Thank you so much. It's really interesting to see how even just a couple of years difference in age pans out in different preferences and behaviors. Garrick, you're doing a lot of analytical work coming at this from a macro perspective. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you expect maybe to see changing longer term as opposed to immediately, and or thoughts on how different sectors are experiencing this differently?
Well, I think it's really important to keep in mind, a lot of people have talked about COVID as accelerant. It's also been a decelerant. A lot of what was really happening that was vibrant and exciting in retail has basically been put on hold. And the challenge is that some of that, like entertainment, experiential retail, food and beverage, those things, the one challenge we've got is that a lot of it was dominated by small business, which really is going to need some more help, or the devastation we've seen already is going to get worse. That stuff's going to come back. Wellness will come back. In fact, I think it'll be an obsession after this. Mm-hmm. But, what's been accelerated, though, has been, of course, e-commerce, which already was an existential challenge to brick and mortar. And then certainly, what we've also seen is if you were already struggling as a retailer, if you already had relevance issues and you're trying to figure out a timetable for turning things around, your timetable got taken away. So there's going to be a lot of pain, but, coming out of this, there are some categories that are killing it. Beyond e-commerce, for example, grocery on the whole is up 10% compared to, restaurants being down 25% more or less. And a couple of odd ones that you wouldn't think off the top of your head, but home improvement, anything having to do with nesting, because we're spending so much time at home. And we did see a short-term boost for sporting goods, office supplies, consumer electronics. That's coming back to earth now that people have their home offices set up. Mm-hmm. But it is really critical to remember in retail that retail is not a monolithic thing, even though we think in terms of malls and iconic department stores. That's such a small slice of the market. And it's really a category by category impact.
Right. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I remember there was a period we couldn't buy web cameras, we couldn't buy treadmills, a lot of supply chain impacts, both the supply and the demand impact there. Barry, over to you. Maybe extending on some of the things that we heard from Liz about the retail trends, and maybe extending from what Garrick said about what's happening in different sectors or lines of retail from your perspective.
Sure. I think kind of adding on to what Liz was saying, there's a lot of changes and trends in terms of customer expectations, but I think the most important from a retailer standpoint is going to be managing their inventory and ensuring that the inventory is available wherever the consumer is looking to purchase it. So we're used to now not only buying things on online, but in marketplaces, on social media, and there's a lot of places and points of engagement, and the retailer is going to need to have inventory visibility and a nimble way to be able to move goods to where the demand is based on their inventory strategies. I think if I step back and said the number one thing that people need to think about from now through probably through ever, is going to be having product available to purchase. I think that we'll wait for goods because we've been waiting for toilet paper and televisions and furniture, but we want to know that we can secure them. I do think that buy online, pick up in store is going to drive people into stores. And there's a lot of studies about, the high percentages in excess of 60% from WD partners that's saying that consumers are excited to kind of secure their product, but then are willing to go into the store to save on delivery and to have some store experience. And that's driving incremental units when the consumer is in the store. That's like great news. You're might be acquiring new customers and you get to share an in-store experience that maybe you would not have otherwise been able to. But if you look at kind of the winners, it's really been about breadth of assortment and value that have been driving the strong results. So obviously, Walmart, Target, dollar stores have been great. Five Below has been really strong. And then I think Garrick's spot on. There were, some really strong moments early on for companies like Best Buy for electronics. I know the first thing we did when we knew we were going to be home was buy a new TV because otherwise we're gonna have to talk to each other. So athletics was very strong in the beginning. Also, quick service restaurants, places where you could drive through and not, and where they didn't offer necessarily sitting down inside. Those businesses benefited in the beginning, from having restrictions. The apparel business, which we haven't really talked about too much, has definitely been tougher, but I think it's more to Liz's point, with consumers that were buying anything that was tailored, related to the office. Suiting has been very, very tough. Anything formal, think about tuxedo rentals and just the number of weddings that have been postponed, etc. Those industries have been struggling. And then obviously, we're looking at, we don't know what's going to happen with theaters. We've all been waiting for, the next Tom Cruise movie to come out or the next James Bond movie to come out, and things like that are being delayed. And the theaters are, dealing with capacities just like restaurants are, and that industry is really going to suffer.
Thanks for that, Barry, and also connecting us back to how there's that relationship between the different properties in an area. For example, maybe historically the food and beverage was the draw because you wanted that experience, but now some of those food and beverages are closed. But a recent experience for me was that with less seating available, we had to wait longer, and so for the restaurant, and then went to stores that we wouldn't have gone to usually. So things are really getting mixed up. Phil, can you give us a little bit more of that food and beverage experience perspective, and what are some of the things that are changing short and long term?
Sure. It's been an incredibly active time in the food and beverage world. I'm 100% certain that most, if not all, Americans had no clue how thin the line was for their favorite independent restaurant from success to complete failure, because they had no idea of the economics that those restaurants worked under. when I think about this, and I think that's good, right? That if you understand how a business works and it's an amenity in your life, you're more inclined to treat it with a little more care and frankly, a little bit more forgiveness. So what we saw, Barry made a quick mention of it, which was accurate. The pandemic, first and foremost, was nothing short, of cataclysmic to the independent restaurant industry. The independent industry, I identify as those small restaurant groups that are not part of the Darden world or not part of the Yum Brands world. The groups that were getting, frankly, the most attention from the millennial and Gen Z demographic before COVID. And I know Garrick will back me up on this. We were in January, we were making bets on what big restaurant chains were going to file for bankruptcy because it simply wasn't happening for them. The Cheesecake Factories of the world were becoming dinosaurs. And we looked and believed that the independent restaurant groups, the more artisanal groups, were really going to take a big leap going forward. Well, that didn't happen. And what did happen was those groups that had access to cash, investment cash, capital, got to live another day. And some of them, I'd say maybe even are thriving. Groups like Domino's, anybody who's delivering or who's available for pickup are having record sales. That's not something to bank on going forward. But what there is to bank on going forward is an American acceptance now of pickup and delivery of much of their food and beverage. You saw throughout the pandemic that states that have had, as a lawyer, I've banged my head against my desk more times than not over crazy archaic liquor laws that exist throughout the country in every state. And now a lot of those laws are loosening up because of straight up a loss of tax revenue, right? If you can't sell the booze at the bar, you can't generate the tax revenue that goes to pay the police and the firemen and all of that. So takeaway alcohol is becoming something that frankly should have been in existence for the last 20 years, and that's going to stick around. I think the biggest thing, though, that we're going to see in the future, and I say the future in terms of the next 3 years, it will be a slow road back for the independent restaurant industry. That industry will need to rely on the real estate industry, both retail and mixed use, because it is, frankly, my opinion, that the industries of the retail real estate industry and the mixed use real estate industry need the restaurant amenity much more today than the restaurant amenity needs the real estate amenity. And that's because of the advancement of ghost kitchens and delivery and things like that, which we can talk about later. But personally, I don't spend a lot of time in cheesecake factories. I might wind up spending a little more, though, than I would have had we not had a pandemic.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for that, Phil. I'm going to ask, before we go to Naveen, I'm going to ask Stephanie to jump in here, having thought about sort of Main Street USA and maybe struggling to get that diversity that people experience in a mall or sort of manufactured cultural environment into some of the spaces that are in a natural urban street. Stephanie, thoughts on some of the things that are needed typologically or what kinds of spaces people are seeking in those urban environments? What programs they're looking for?
Absolutely. And I think something you said, Phil, that resonated with me was how you were speaking about care and forgiveness. And I think that has increasingly been something that we see across like the community that we engage with. People are interested and invested in supporting the businesses that mean the most to them. And I think increasingly we're seeing that people are showing up for neighborhoods. They're tired of living in generic spaces and they want to live somewhere with meaning. Food is a huge part of that, as is culture, as is events, as is just like basic public amenities with outdoor spaces that create a space where people can gather and feel comfortable without having to go through, you know, the checks to make sure that you're not like, you don't have a fever, that you don't exhibit these symptoms. And so I think increasingly the spaces that express that sort of care, I mean, even most recently, the giant sort of activation of like the meatpacking district, you see how that neighborhood is coming out for people and creating a space that makes people feel comfortable gathering outdoors again. And I think that's really going to drive at least the placemaking aspect in the next few months to years.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. And for the, again, anchor leg, Naveen, so much was already changing before COVID. Technology in particular, organizations were being driven to be more digital, and the bricks and mortar versus digital divide had been, you know, on the radar for quite some time. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you've seen that transformation be pushed further from COVID, or what more you're seeing in those macro trends?
Yeah, so technology is going to be a big divider between the retailers that will survive 5 years from now and ones that won't. Look, I think that the COVID has certainly pushed a lot of people to buying things online. We've seen that statistics bear out. Grocery sector, which Garrett talked about, is probably one of the biggest beneficiaries of online shopping. In some cases, speaking of some brands such as H-E-B in Texas and Publix in the Southeast, some of those brands talked about their internet sales doubling or tripling within about 3 weeks period. You know, you used to be able to buy something on Costco online for delivery and you get it within 5 or 6 hours. We heard back in March, April, May, the delivery time was 5 days. Went from 5 hours to 5 days. That was staggering. Let me give you a couple of stats to talk about how technology has changed the way retailers operate and the way they think about it down the road. In using the grocery sector as one good measure, and I'm sure Liz can talk about it from a fashion segment, but I'll tell you in grocery as one, to fulfill a $100 basket for online to curbside pickup costs about $7 for fulfilling that $100 basket of grocery. To get that $100 basket of grocery to your home costs about $21. So when the grocery business sees an uptick in top line sales, what it doesn't reflect just yet is how it is so margin dilutive. It doesn't work for the grocery business, and it actually doesn't work for a lot of businesses to be so emboldened to online. So every retailer in America wants you to get back to the store. And the US recovery will be determined ultimately by how soon people get back to traveling and how soon people get back to shopping by their feet into the store. That's when retailers will show top line and bottom line recovery. You will see retailers taking on much more technology to push the consumer to greater engagement. But at the end of the day, let's not take any sadness away from the fact that restaurants for Phil and retailers like Liz and Barry from her days as a retailer will tell you all, we need people back into the store shopping, because that's when you see the mass growth of retail taking that way for recovery. So digital will be a big part of it, but no bones about it. We need people to back out to shop and shop by their feet, not by their iPhone.
Great, thank you, Naveen. Great point. And what other time do we think of shopping more than the holiday season? And that's right around the corner. We've heard on some of our prep calls about how you're looking to extend that retail experience both into different formats and media, but also extending the timeline. Maybe we start shopping for the holidays sooner. I'm seeing the Halloween decks are already going so that we can get the Christmas decks into the stores. So we've got 2 audience questions here. The first one is, how are you most likely to shop this upcoming holiday season? So the options range from online only, mostly outdoors, mostly local, big box stores, or at a mall. Or you can put in other and then give us your answers in the chat. Then the second question, what type of items are you most hesitant to purchase online without that in-person touch and feel, or touch and flow, as the question says here. Sorry for that typo. Clothing, electronics, home furnishings, beauty, hygiene, anything expensive, that's my vote, I have to confess. And then, or other, is there something else that you really just hesitate to buy when you can't have that, that online experience? So unfortunately, us panelists cannot vote, but we are sitting on the edge of our seats to hear what your votes are. Please do quickly click in there and place your vote, and then we'll get to look at the results. And we'll also be skipping to our next panelist topic, which will be looking at the future. So Amy, I think that we're ready to see the results. Alrighty, look at this, guys and gals. We're looking at about 50% of our audience anticipating online only. Good for you, Stephanie. 20% mostly local, and another 2% for mostly outdoor. We've got 16% ready to go back to the shopping malls and the big box stores. And then 10% other. Please do throw your other descriptions here in the chat so that we can hear those. Then question number 2, what are people hesitant to purchase online? Interesting news here, Liz and Barry. Clothing, hesitant to purchase online. Number 2 in hesitation is home furnishings. And I guess people are still pretty excited about beauty and hygiene products. They're not as hesitant as I am about buying expensive things, so maybe that's good for our luxury lines. And then some other thoughts coming through the chat. Someone said, Marcia or Mauricia says, purchase shoes in person only. That's probably a good choice. And then a couple more responses to some of the things you mentioned, Stephanie, about the Facebook Marketplace. Okay, thank you so much. So let's shift gears from what we've been learning in COVID and what has maybe been the forced changes to what is some of what we're looking forward to seeing in the future, either hoping optimistically or maybe anticipating might be coming our way. So I'm going to start with you here, Barry, and also we're going to shift in this section to real estate, right? So what are the physical implications of some of this as well? So Barry, I'm hoping you might help kick off this section, particularly as it relates to the changing customer experience.
Sure. So I think that as we move forward and look at the future, and I touched on it a little bit earlier, the consumer is going to want to have a much greater engagement with their brand. And so I kind of sit back and say, if we're willing to order almost anything online, and we're certainly willing to order it online and pick it up in the store, what's going to make people stay in the store and have kind of that engagement, put on the mask and come in? And we talked about this early on when Cushman and Wakefield launched the Safe 8, which was the return of customers into retail stores. It's really an amazing time for retailers to start to think about what their brands stand for, what their product stands for, and how they're going to engage their consumers. There's been a big focus, I think, from retailers on survival over the last couple of years, and we've all touched upon it today. But I think as we go forward, the right product, the right marketing, the right engagement in terms of language, thinking about the things that matter to us now as consumers, sustainability, race relations, in some cases politics and where people stand on certain areas. Those are all going to be important. We're looking for our brands to be transparent, to communicate their values to us. And then also when we get into the store, to have great customer service. I think the days of having people that really aren't knowledgeable about product or fit or fabric are long gone. And I think what you're going to kind of see is this bifurcation in stores where there's a portion of the staff really working on fulfillment. So I'm picking it up outside, I'm picking it up in the store, I'm fulfilling an e-commerce order from the store, and then I'm really supporting what's going on in the store from a customer engagement standpoint. And I do think that this is going to come at somewhat of a price, but there is definitely opportunity for people who have limited capital to still start to think about their experiences and really do it through training and through the right hiring and the right messaging.
Thank you so much, Barry. Naveen, also interested in your perspective on how that customer experience is changing the landscape and what the future looks like from your perspective.
Yeah, I think most retailers have had to adapt to the fact that consumers want safety and they want the optics of safety to shop physically. And that's one of the reasons why they're going to online. I think your response on the survey tells you 50% of your listeners are going to shop online predominantly, which that could be a variety of reasons, but I think a lot of it has to do with the feeling of not being 100% secure in the safety element of shopping outdoors right now. And so I think, first of all, owners and retailers both together have to start thinking about how they can partner together to make sure consumers feel safe. And that can be anything from making sure that there's enough of these sanitation stations and the things you have to make available, to spacing out stores, to limiting the number of people visiting inside stores. These things are sometimes optics more than reality, but you have to make the consumer feel safe. So we all know that malls right now are the ones that are probably feeling the biggest pain in terms of consumers' return. I'll give you a stat that I just heard from Simon Properties a couple of days ago that tells you the difference in pre-pandemic to post-pandemic consumer behavior. Pre-pandemic, the average Simon Mall consumer shopped at 6 locations per visit. When they walked into a Simon Mall, they made 6 stops during their visit to the mall. Today, that's gone down to 3 stops. That tells you consumers are walking in, buying what they want, they're not shopping, they're buying, and they're leaving. And that's the difference that we will see over time, is that you won't have people making impulse buying when they just walk into a mall for 1 or 2 purchases. So I think right now owners need to understand consumers want safety first and foremost as a deciding factor about where they shop. And secondly, we know that consumers right now are going to shop closer to home. So as a result, we're going to see less mall drives, less city center drives, less urban drives, and staying closer to home. And that trend of closer to home shopping is happening globally, not just in the urban cities of Philly, New York, Boston. It's happening in Vienna, Berlin, it's happening in Barcelona, it's happening in Shanghai, it's happening across the world. And until consumers get back to taking public transportation and shopping urban, we'll still see that slow move back to the urban marketplace. So for now, I think you'll see more sales happening at the suburban level than the urban side.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Naveen. We wish the best to our urban centers. We certainly all love them. Liz, what does it look like from your perspective? What do you have in your crystal ball for our young women?
Well, I guess I'll echo a little bit both of what Naveen and Barry said. I would say twofold. First, on the connected customer journey is going to be critical. And that's where technology is really going to come into play. Store of the futures previously were these beautiful big stores with sexy touch screens. And that's how retailers were leveraging technology, this more exciting experience. Now it's much more about connecting every part of the journey for the customer. So whether she can access her account on the app, know what she's purchased in the past, see what she's going to purchase in the future, make the decisions about where she wants to purchase it, whether it's online or in the store, whether she wants to schedule an appointment to come in and have things curated for her. So things like that are actually, this whole selling model is coming back full fold. And really, we're looking at now the store associate of the future. And as Barry mentioned, how they are incredibly knowledgeable. So if a customer actually feels safe enough to come into the store, it's purposeful, she can get what she needs, it's convenient, and she can get in and out very, very quickly. And us as retailers can capture those sales, because I'm concerned about the panel where they're excited to shop online, but they're not buying clothing. This is the conundrum that I face. So we're looking now at really this whole connected journey, and then rethinking the footprint of our stores. So previously, of course, we were all gunning for these beautiful city center, big flagship stores. Now we're looking at maybe that's much more of a pop-up concept, curated assortment, very focused to test out new retail locations, and really shifting a lot of our efforts into the suburban centers right now, which is where we're seeing customers shop. So it's definitely turning our retail portfolio somewhat upside down. And, you know, we're thinking about our stores very, very differently, and how technology needs to support each of those different types of stores, whether it's, you know, truly a flagship, or maybe now a new curated pop-up, or, you know, whether it's just our regular kind of mall store that's full service. And now, and I'll call out Lucille DeHart, who asked a question about, you know, fulfillment hubs. We are thinking, even as a retailer, a small retailer like myself, should we have more localized fulfillment hubs that are even consumer facing, and turning our stores, some of our stores, bigger locations, into these multi-dynamic, you know, customer facing fulfillment centers to get, you know, last mile purchases and closer to the customer. So really a lot of new exciting conversations are having on what our future of the store will look like and what the customer journey will be.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I am seeing the chat popping up with a lot of comments about that transformation, that more diversity, with the idea even that with possibly less expensive space, we might see more office and kind of activities happening from that streetscape. I'm about to ask Garrick and Stephanie to tell us a little bit more about their perspectives on what this means for urban high streets, lifestyle centers, etc. But as we go into that, we also have another pop-up question here. One is, first, what do you think, how much space vacancy do you think is going to be created by COVID in these former retail, or in the retail? So don't answer about office on this one. Just what is your estimate of the increase in vacancy due to COVID? And then question number 2, what would you like to fill in that empty space? When retail exits, what would you like to see in its place? First answer there being put retail right back in, or more cafes and restaurants, art galleries, co-working, public space, fitness, exercise space, or other. Put in your own response into that chat. So please do move quickly here. We are going to do our best to keep to our 1:15 ending time. We did have some technical issues at the beginning, so we might go over by a couple minutes, but I do want to get your answers quickly, and then we'll hear briefly from Garrick and Stephanie. All right, Amy, everyone's voting quickly today, so I think we can look at those results promptly. All right, 20%, and maybe that's 20% or more because we've got so many people with that higher figure. So 70% predicting a 20% vacancy due to COVID. And people want to see more cafes and restaurants. Well, that's good news for you, Phil. But also we've got nearly 30% on co-working and public space combined. So good news for you, Stephanie. And 8% for fitness and exercise space. So this is really interesting. Sorry, art galleries are not quite there yet for us. So maybe with reflections on this data or additional thoughts, we do have to just have like a 90-second response here. But Garrick, your thoughts on what this means for the future?
Students are right if we're lucky. Not counting whatever the vacancy was prior to this, part of my work is to try to quantify the challenges. And we're just at the beginning end of this. I mean, it's going to be a couple of years of challenges, but we're dealing with what I'm tracking 20% of the market at risk, which means we're going to have to find something else to do with it. And that's beyond just restaurants and beyond, you know, I mean, I think this move to the suburbs is real. You know, think of it this way, retail is always about following the rooftops. One of the big successes of the last decade was urban retail, not just because travel was at all-time high levels, which travel is a massive driver for urban high streets, but that we had a situation where urban growth from about 2005 onward was accounting for 20% plus of the population growth. The previous 40 years, it was like 8%. Now, it was driven by millennials and empty nest boomers, the two largest generations, which, as they move through the phases of their life, and this is why it's important to understand demographics, it's slow moving, you can predict it very easily. As they move through those phases, more and more boomers would simply not be with us, and more millennials would hit family rearing age and probably move to the suburbs. They would have been, save for COVID, replaced by people like me, empty nest Gen Xers, and our kids, Gen Z. It's just that is on hold right now. Cities aren't going to die. That's where the jobs are. That's where the creation are. But right now, the shift is to the suburbs. And when you see that, you see, for example, the challenges of malls. And when millennials get to the suburbs, do you think they're going to become boomers? I don't. The reason they were in the city was for live, work, play, convenience. So keeping that in mind, if you're looking at that real estate problem, what's the answer?
Excellent. Thank you so much. Very thought-provoking, Garrick. Stephanie, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what goes into that space. And as you do so, we're going to be running a reel of some images showing how our cityscapes have already begun to be transformed by some of the COVID response, if you don't mind that, Stephanie.
Absolutely. Yeah, excited to see the images. In terms of what's going into that space, I mean, I think increasingly, particularly with those places, with those businesses that already have leases, you're going to see increased efficient use of space. There will be people who see the benefit of collaboration, both probably operationally as well as monetarily. They'll see resonances in demographics, and it will, like, collaboration has just been like a great sort of outcome of all of this. And I think increasingly there is going to be more focus on amenities for the public. I mean, outdoor spaces now seem to not be sufficient. And so I think we're seeing specifically increased number of projects trying to make the outdoors more hospitable for all weathers.
Yeah, thank you for that, Stephanie. I mean, the role of architecture and therefore real estate in its built form is to protect us as people from the elements and bring us places to come together. So fascinating to see the things that are happening there. So just, we haven't heard on this topic of what does the future look like for Phil. I have announced in the chat that we'll be going over a couple of minutes to make sure that we have time to finish off this round, and then we'll be hearing from Tara and Craig to close us out. So Phil, maybe responding to some of these images that we're seeing of the future, or maybe hearing some of your desired future condition. What is the future of F&B?
Well, that's a great question. And we actually do see a very robust future for it. We're going to see some difficulty in the near term. First, what I want to say is that we will go back and we will be seeing rebirth in artisanality and the interest in artisanality from Gen Z and millennials. It's really important to remember, and Garrick reminds me consistently, it was not a lack of interest or a stoppage of spending from the Gen Z and millennial demographic that put the restaurant industry into this problem, right? So they are going to come back and spend as soon as the opportunities arise to do it in a safe place. And the first place they're going to go, by the way, are just going to be the places that they trusted before. So long as they can stay alive, they're going to go back and do that. I will also note that there are some people on the panel who know me. Our group, you would have thought at 6 months ago that our group, which strategically advises developers and landlords on where food and beverage is going, you would have thought we would have been hearing crickets and not being busy at all. But to the contrary, we've been super busy because we've seen an increase in developers who recognize opportunities, in particular for projects that look like food halls. Now, food hall is not always the answer, but the economics behind food halls, where you see developers taking the investment risk, building out stations, providing artisanal vendors with the opportunity to come in and operate at a fraction of what it might cost them to open a standalone restaurant, is gaining in popularity, and it's gaining in popularity outside of the big cities, which is where everybody thought they would just live forever. So we see a great deal of advancement in that thought. We love the fact that they can be programmed to accomplish everything from food and beverage to entertainment to retail, to traditional retail. There's an awful lot that can be done in those spaces. And then lastly, you know, the good news that comes along with the bad news is, in the big cities, many people in the food and beverage industry go to get their tickets punched. They will go to New York to work as chefs. They will go to Los Angeles. Well, I can tell you that all of my colleagues have told me that a lot of those people have gone home and they don't intend to come back to New York or San Francisco. So there's going to be an uptick in quality in a lot of towns around America, and look for it, because wherever I've been in this country, I've found really good food. And I think that's a good portent for cities that are outside, you know, of the big 5 or 6.
Wow, Phil, thank you so much for that closing remark here. I think it's so optimistic, the idea that this forced shift improves the food and beverage and retail and hospitality and shopping experience for everyone, maybe spreads it across our country and cities a little bit differently, and provides greater access long term. I really do appreciate that. I am going to have to recommend that we make these webinars longer, because I feel like we have just scratched the surface here. I see so many great questions in the chat, and I'm sorry we're not able to answer them, but I guarantee you this set of panelists is super committed to Lehigh and also to the real estate community in New York and beyond. And so I really encourage you to reach out to them. I guarantee that they will be accessible to you, whether from a career perspective or to continue this conversation. So if you've thrown questions in the chat, please do reach out and get them answered from our fabulous panelists. And thank you again, panelists, for your time now in this session, your prep, and I honestly feel better about the future of real estate with the idea that such fabulous, thoughtful, creative perspectives are going into building our next generation of cities and sub-cities, suburban environments as well. With that, I'd like to hand the mic back to Tara Stakem and allow her to give us some guiding words for the future.
I had just wanted to say very briefly at the outset that what pulled us all together was the real estate program at Lehigh, which is run by an extraordinary man, McKay Price, who's really turned a program into something so many students want to share in. We've had 2,600 students take courses at Lehigh in real estate, and they do so because he runs a program which is really engaging them in real world opportunities, as well as events like these, where really hot topics get covered by and shared by the students, alum, and industry professionals. So thank you to all of the panelists. You really made this very interesting and fascinating. I'm greatly appreciative to those that I asked.
As Tara was saying, the Goodman Center of Real Estate continues to offer content on relevant topics to alumni and the general public. The next one is next month in November on commercial real estate trends. So this was centered on retail. The next panel will be more broad real estate topics. The invitations are coming shortly, so look for that in your inbox. And we had a great turnout for this, so thank you all for participating. Have a good day.